So why does synthetic division work? Before we understand that, we need to understand the factor theorem. So let's look at a more simple example. So the factor theorem comes from the fact that if we solve a polynomial, what we're doing is finding the roots. And the roots of a polynomial, well, this is a quadratic, so it's going to look like a U-shaped graph. And the roots of the polynomial is where does it cross the x-axis. So in this case, it crosses roughly at -1 and +2. Okay, so those are the roots. And when you're solving a quadratic equation, one way to do it is to use factors. So we factorize this expression, and we get x minus 2 and x plus 1. And then we solve each of these. So x minus 2 equals 0 and x plus 1 equals 0. So to solve this one, I'm going to add 2 to both sides, which gives me x equals 2. And over here, I will get x equals -1. So these are the roots. These bits are the factors, and from the factors, we get the roots, or the solutions. And if it is a root, so x equals 2, if 2 is a root, we should be able to substitute it in for all the x's up here, and the equation should be true. So in other words, it should be equal to 0. So 2 squared is 4 minus 2 minus 2. Well, we can see that that does give us 0. So that solution is correct, or in other words, 2 is a root. So the factor theorem says that if we substitute in the root, it will equal to 0, and that means that this is a factor where the root came from. So if x minus 2 is a factor, then x equals 2 is a root, and vice versa. So synthetic division comes from that same idea. What we're trying to do is show that this is a factor. So if it is a factor, that means if I say 2x minus 1 equal to 0 and solve it, I get x equals a half. If that 2x minus 1 is a factor, then a half is a root. So if I substitute it into this polynomial, I should get the answer 0. But we're only looking at the coefficients in synthetic division. So this is where it gets a little bit funny. If I take this polynomial, and I'm going to firstly factorize out an x from all of these three. These three have a common factor of x. So if I factorize out an x, I get 6x squared plus 5x minus 10. And then I have the plus 3 sitting at the end. Now I'm going to repeat that. I'm going to factorize out an x of these two. So x is my original x. Now I'm going to factorize out this x. So I'll get 6x plus 5, and that minus 10 is still sitting there, and that plus 3 is still sitting there. So now I can substitute in my root, my 1/2 here, in for each of these x's. Each time I do it, when I substitute in for this x, I'm multiplying by 6 first, which is the coefficient here. Then I have to add the next coefficient. Then when I substitute in the next x, whatever my solution is, I'm going to be multiplying by a half, and then I'm going to be subtracting the 10. So let's see it in action. So first of all, I'm going to substitute in this half here. So this is 6 times a half and plus 5. Well, 6 times a half is 3. 3 plus 5 is 8. So all of that in the bracket there is a value of 8. So there's the bracket, and I now have x times my 8 minus 10. So next I go substitute in my half here. A half times 8 is 4. 4 minus 10 is minus 6. So this bracket now is a value of minus 6. And all that's left is the x at the start and the plus 3 at the end. So for the last time, if I substitute in a half, for here, half times -6 is -3. -3 plus 3 is 0. So all of that is equal to 0, which means it is a factor. So that means if it's a factor, it means it divides in evenly. So with our synthetic division, that's basically all we're doing. We've got our 6 at the start, then our 5, minus 10, and 3. When we times each of these by half, what we're really doing is timesing by 1 and then dividing by 2. So if I build up my frame, firstly, 6 times 1 is 6, so put the 6 down here, and then I have to divide it by 2, which is 3. Okay, so this is basically this section here. 6 times a half gives me 3, but then I need to add the 5, so I put the 3 up there. And 5 times 5 plus the 3 gives me 8, divided by 2 gives me the 4, and then I need to subtract the 10. So 4 subtract 10 is negative 6, and so on. So each of these steps here, multiplying by half, is what we're doing in this synthetic division. At the end, each of these results will become my, what was that, minus 3? Each of these results will become my final answer. So 3x squared, 4x, and minus 3.